My name is Lisa, and on that bright Tuesday morning in Denver, my world was the size of my garden, smelling of damp earth and the sweet perfume of late-blooming roses. The sun felt warm on my shoulders, a gentle, familiar comfort as I tended to the flower beds Arthur and I had planted together so many years ago. Every petal was a memory, a testament to a life built on love and quiet devotion. In my mind, this day felt like a prelude to another beautiful memory, another milestone in the life I had dedicated myself to nurturing. The pale rose dress, the color of a happy promise, hung in my closet, a silent sentinel waiting for the day my only son, David, would finally marry his fiancée, Sophie. I had imagined the moment 1,000 times, the pride swelling in my chest, the joyful tears I would quickly brush away. For the past 4 years, since David had moved in with her, their comfort had become my silent, second mortgage. I never saw it as a burden, only as an extension of my love. It started with the down payment on their first apartment, a gift I was proud to give. Then came the furniture for their living room, because I couldn't bear the thought of them eating on folding chairs. I remember the day we picked out their sofa, the three of us laughing as we tested each one. I insisted on the slightly more expensive one with the softer fabric, picturing them curled up on it during cold Denver winters. Soon, my support became a monthly habit, a quiet transfer of $600 for their rent, an amount that ensured they had a nice place in a safe neighborhood, a place nicer than I could have afforded at their age. I filled their refrigerator when they were between jobs and paid for Sophie's emergency dental surgery without a second thought. I still recall that frantic, tearful call from her on a Sunday afternoon. She was in so much pain, and I dropped everything, drove to the bank to withdraw the cash, and met her at the clinic, holding her hand while she trembled. I did it all willingly, believing I was investing in their happiness, building a foundation for their future so they could focus on each other. I thought my generosity was the soil in which their love could flourish, unburdened by the harsh realities of the world. With my gardening gloves still on, I pulled out my phone, my heart light with anticipation. I just wanted to hear his voice, to ask about the date, to feel a part of the joyful planning I had been dreaming of. I pictured my grandson or granddaughter one day, looking at the wedding album and seeing me there, beaming with pride. I dialed David's number, but it was Sophie who answered, her voice as smooth and cool as polished stone. "Hi, Lisa," she said, a little too brightly. I could hear the faint sound of a television in the background. I asked for David, but she said he was busy, so I pushed on, my own voice warm with excitement. "I was just calling to see if you two had set a date for the wedding yet. I'm just so thrilled for you both." There was a pause, just a beat of silence that felt strangely cold over the line. Then Sophie let out a little laugh, a sound so devoid of warmth it was chilling. "Oh, Lisa," she said, and the casualness of her tone was the most brutal part. "We got married yesterday. It was just a small thing at the courthouse. We only invited special people." The words weren't a shout. They were a quiet, precise incision that severed something deep inside me. Asterisk special people, asterisk. The two words hung in the air, echoing in the sudden, vast emptiness of my sunny garden. The phone felt impossibly heavy in my hand, my knuckles white as I gripped it. My breath caught in my chest. I don't remember what I said. If anything, I think I might have mumbled a congratulations before the line went dead. I stood there for a long time, the scent of roses suddenly cloying and unbearable. The foundation I thought I had been building wasn't for their future. It was just a platform they had stood on, and I was the part of the scaffolding that was no longer needed once the structure was complete. Later that evening, long after the sun had set, I found myself scrolling through Sophie's social media page, a masochistic impulse I couldn't resist, and there it was, an album titled The Beginning of Forever. Each photograph was a new, smiling wound. There was Sophie in a simple white dress I'd never seen, a dress I realized must have been bought with the emergency money I had sent her last month. There she was, holding a bouquet, standing beside my son. David was smiling, but his eyes wouldn't quite meet the camera. He looked handsome in his suit, but he also looked like a stranger. And surrounding them were her parents, their faces glowing with pride. Her sisters were there, raising glasses of champagne and a toast. I zoomed in, studying the faces of strangers who were deemed more special than I was. Every image was a confirmation of Sophie's words. It was a gathering of special people, and I was not one of them. I saw the faces, the joy, the celebration of a life I had financed but was not permitted to witness. My role, it seemed, was to pay for the party, not to attend it. That night, sleep was a distant shore I couldn't reach. The darkness of my bedroom felt suffocating, each familiar shadow twisting into a shape of my own foolishness. The house, usually a source of comfort and memories, felt like a hollow thing around me, its silence amplifying the replay of Sophie's voice in my head. We only invited special people. The words looped endlessly, each repetition peeling back another layer of my naive belief in a love I thought was reciprocated. I had given everything, not just my money, but my time, my energy, my emotional availability. I was the one they called in a crisis, the one who listened, the one who provided. And in the end, my presence at the most important moment of my son's life was deemed non-essential. I finally got out of bed and walked into the living room, the moonlight casting long, lonely shadows on the floor. My eyes fell on the silver-framed photograph on the mantelpiece, a picture of Arthur and me, taken on our 20th anniversary. He had his arm around me, and we were both laughing, his eyes crinkling at the corners in that way I loved so much. He had been gone for 10 years, but in that moment, his presence felt more real than anything else. I picked up the frame, my fingers tracing the outline of his face. His eyes in the photograph seemed to hold a gentle wisdom, a knowing sadness, as if he could see the pain I was in. And then I heard his voice, not with my ears, but deep in my memory, a low, steady anchor from a conversation we'd had long ago. We had been on our porch, watching a summer storm roll in. He had been talking about a relative who was constantly taking advantage of others, and his words were meant as a gentle caution for my own generous spirit. Never let them mistake your kindness for a weakness. Lisa, he had said, his hand covering mine. Your heart is your greatest strength, but you must also be its fiercest protector. Don't set yourself on fire to keep others warm. A sob escaped my throat, a ragged, painful sound. I had failed. I had not protected my heart. In fact, I had set myself on fire for them again and again, and hadn't even noticed I was turning to ash. I had offered my heart up freely, and in doing so, I had let them devalue it. I had let them see my unwavering kindness not as a gift, but as an entitlement. The grief that had been a cold, heavy blanket all night began to shift. Beneath it, something hot was beginning to stir anger. It was a slow burn at first, a simmering resentment at my own blindness. How had I not seen it, the way they only called when they needed something, the way their gratitude was always fleeting, a brief prelude to the next request, the way Sophie would call me Mom with such sweetness, a word she only used when a bill was due. The numbers began to scroll behind my eyes, a frantic, unforgiving ledger of my generosity. The 4 years of rent at $600 a month, that was over $28,000 alone. The $5,000 for the down payment on David's car because he needed something reliable. The $1,000 for Sophie's dental work. The hundreds of dollars here and there for groceries, for utilities, for plane tickets to her family's reunions. I remembered the trip to Hawaii I had planned for myself 2 years ago. A trip I canceled because they had a financial crisis that required $2,000 to solve. I had given them my vacation money without hesitation. I remembered the new winter coat I had wanted last year, but decided against. Telling myself the old one was fine, just a week before I gave them $500 for a new television. It wasn't a transaction, it was a transfusion. I had poured my life, my savings, the money Arthur had left to ensure my own comfort and security into them, and they had simply let it spill onto the ground without a second glance. The anger grew, hot and clarifying. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the profound disrespect. They hadn't just taken my money, they had taken my love, my sacrifice, my very essence as a mother, and deemed it worthless. And in the cold, quiet darkness of my home, I knew that the Lisa who had existed yesterday, the foolish, ever-giving mother, could not exist tomorrow. The days that followed that sleepless night were a strange, quiet purgatory. The white-hot anger that had felt so clarifying in the darkness cooled into a grim, heavy resolve in the light of day. I moved through my house like a ghost, the silence a constant companion. Every object seemed to mock me with a memory of my own foolishness: the expensive coffee machine I'd bought them for Christmas, the plush throw blanket on the sofa that I knew Sophie loved. I had built my life around the gravitational pull of my son, and now, having stepped out of that orbit, I felt untethered, floating in a vast and unnerving emptiness. I didn't answer my phone, letting the calls from unknown numbers go to voicemail. I knew it was them, and I wasn't ready. The warrior forged in the midnight hours felt fragile, her armor thin and untested. Then, on Friday morning, the inevitable happened. My phone rang, and this time, I saw Sophie's name flash on the screen. A jolt of adrenaline, sharp and unpleasant, shot through me. I let it ring, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It stopped, and a moment later, it rang again. She was persistent. On the third try, a part of me, the mother I had been for 40 years, the woman conditioned to solve, to soothe, to provide, took over. I answered, my hand trembling slightly. Her voice was just as I expected, high-pitched with a frantic edge, laced with an indignation that was utterly astonishing. There was no apology, no preamble, just a demand disguised as a panic. Lisa, the landlord just called, the rent is 3 days late, and he's threatening us with an eviction notice. Did you forget to make the transfer? The word forget was like a lit match tossed into a pool of gasoline. Forget, as if my monthly contribution was as automatic and unthinking as my own heartbeat, as if it were a utility I was obligated to pay for a service I was no longer receiving. But even as my anger flared, another, older instinct rose to meet it: fear. Fear of my son being homeless, fear of the final, irreparable severing of our bond, fear of being the cruel mother, the one who would stand by and watch her child struggle. The muscle memory of 4 years was a powerful, treacherous thing. Before I was even fully aware of what I was doing, I had ended the call, opened my banking app, and navigated to the transfer screen. My thumb hovered over David's name, the familiar digits of their account already filled in. A war waged in the silent space between my thumb and the screen. The voice of the mother, the provider, screamed at me. He's your son. You can't do this. He'll never forgive you. This is your fault for letting it go on this long. It whispered of shame and maternal guilt, of a sacred duty I was about to abandon. My thumb trembled, moving closer to the confirm transfer button. I could end this conflict right now. I could send the money, restore the toxic peace we'd always had, and retreat back into the familiar, painful role of the silent benefactor. It would be easier, it would be simpler. But then, another image forced its way into my mind. Sharp and mercilessly clear Sophie's cold, triumphant little laugh, her voice dripping with casual disdain as she uttered the words that had become seared into my brain. Asterisk. We only invited special people. That memory was the splash of icy water I desperately needed. It broke the spell of obligation. What kind of mother would I be if I continued to fund a life where my own son was taught to disrespect me so profoundly? What lesson would I be teaching him if I showed him that my love, my dignity, and my presence could all be bought back for the price of 1 month's rent? Arthur's voice echoed in my mind. A quiet but firm reminder: be your heart's fiercest protector, my thumb, which had been trembling with indecision, now moved with a steady, deliberate purpose. It swiped the app closed. The war was over. A strange, terrifying calm washed over me. The phone rang again almost immediately. It was Sophie. I let the screen glow for a moment, took a deep breath, and answered. Lisa, what happened? Did the call drop? I was saying. The landlord. I cut her off. My voice was level, devoid of the anger and pain that churned inside me. It was a voice I didn't recognize. as if it belonged to another woman, a stronger one. "I heard you. Sophie," I said. Nothing happened to the call. A confused silence. "So, are you making the transfer? He needs it today." I paused, letting the silence stretch, savoring the unfamiliar sensation of being in control. "I'm sorry," I said, borrowing her cruelty and polishing it into a shield. "I only help special people." The silence on the other end of the line was no longer confused. It was a sharp, stunned void. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, the shock, the disbelief, the dawning rage. I didn't wait for a response. I ended the call and blocked her number. Then I blocked David's. My hand was steady now. The adrenaline faded, and in its place was the profound and terrifying silence of a burned bridge. I had finally done it. I had chosen myself. The victory, however, felt hollow in the hours that followed, leaving a strange, echoing loneliness in its wake. I had won a battle, but I felt utterly alone on the battlefield. The anger that had propelled me forward was gone, replaced by a deep-seated uncertainty. What now? I had spent so many years defining myself by my role as David's mother, his supporter, his safety net. Without that, who was I? The question was terrifying. For the first time, I felt the full weight of my 70 years, not as a collection of wisdom and experience, but as a catalog of time spent investing in a future that had just been erased. I wandered through my quiet house, the newfound freedom feeling less like a liberation and more like an exile. It was in this state of desolate confusion that I thought of my sister, Diana. She was 5 years younger than me, living a world away in Seattle. We spoke every few months, but our conversations had become superficial, a recitation of polite updates. I realized with a fresh pang of shame that, for the past few years, I had mostly talked about David and Sophie, their careers, their apartment, their lives. I had presented a carefully curated image of a proud mother and mother-in-law, never once hinting at the financial drain or the emotional neglect. I had erased myself from my own story. The thought of calling her now, of shattering that illusion and revealing the pathetic truth, filled me with dread. But the alternative, suffocating in this silent house with only my regrets for company, was worse. With trembling fingers, I found her number and dialed. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar. "Lisa, it's been a while. How are you?" The simple question felt monumental. How was I for a moment? I almost gave the standard reply, "I'm fine, everything's good," but the words caught in my throat instead. A choked sob escaped. "Dia," I managed to say, my voice breaking, "I'm not okay." And then it all came pouring out. I told her everything, the story tumbling out in a messy, tearful torrent. I told her about the wedding, the phone call, the cruel words, the pictures on social media. I told her about the years of financial support, the constant giving, the feeling of being an invisible utility in their lives. Saying the words out loud to my sister made them real in a way they hadn't been before. It wasn't just a painful narrative in my head anymore. It was a concrete story of betrayal and abuse. I braced myself for her response, expecting gentle sympathy, perhaps some well-meaning but useless advice about trying to talk things through with David. What I got instead was rage. It wasn't the hot, messy anger I had felt, but a cold, focused fury. There was a long silence on her end, and then I heard her take a sharp breath. "That little witch," she said, her voice a low hiss. "And David, how could he let her? How could he do that to you?" Diana didn't offer platitudes. She offered rage, a pure, unadulterated fury that felt like a transfusion of strength directly into my weary soul. She cursed them in ways I never would, her anger a righteous fire that burned away the last of my guilt and shame. She was angry for me, and in that moment, it was the greatest gift anyone could have given me. "You blocked them, right?" she asked, her tone all business now. I confirmed that I had. "Good," she said. "Lisa, this isn't just a family squabble. This is abuse. financial and emotional abuse. They've been using you for years. And now that you've stood up for yourself, they're not going to just walk away. They're going to push back. And they're going to be nasty. Her words were chilling but validating. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't the villain. You can't handle this alone, she continued. You need a professional, someone who knows how to deal with this kind of thing. I was about to ask what she meant when she said, I have a friend from law school. Her old partner runs a firm in Denver that specializes in this. They focus on elder rights and financial protection. His name is Miller, Robert Miller. I'm going to text you his number right now. You need to call him, not tomorrow. Lisa. Today. A lawyer. The thought had never even crossed my mind. This was a family matter, a heartache. It wasn't a legal case. But as Diana spoke, I realized she was right. David and Sophie had turned our relationship into a series of transactions, and their final act had been a hostile takeover attempt on my dignity. It was time to treat it as such. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a text from her. It contained a name and a number. I stared at the screen, the letters and digits seeming to glow with a strange power. It wasn't just a name and a number. It was a plan. It was a map out of the wilderness I'd been wandering in. It was the first concrete step in tearing down the old world to build a new one. Holding the phone, I finally felt the last of the trembling in my hand subside, replaced by a cold, clear, and absolute resolve. The morning sun streamed through my kitchen window, but it brought none of the gentle warmth from the days before. It felt harsh and interrogating, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny particle of a life that now felt unsettled and strange. I sat at my kitchen table, the phone clutched in my hand, staring at the name and number Diana had sent, Robert Miller. It felt like a foreign object, a piece of a world I had never intended to enter. For hours, I did nothing but look at it, a profound sense of dread warring with the sliver of hope my sister's call had ignited. To make this call was to admit, in a way I hadn't yet, that my family was broken beyond repair. It was to take a private agony and expose it to the cold, impartial light of the law. It felt like a betrayal of the woman I used to be, the mother who believed any wound could be healed with love and patience. But that woman, I had to remind myself, was the one who had been left bleeding. Finally, drawing on a reserve of strength I didn't know I possessed, I took a deep breath and dialed the number. A calm, professional voice answered, and I was put through to Mr. Miller. I stumbled through my story, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate to convey the depth of the humiliation. I expected skepticism, or perhaps a detached, clinical pity. Instead, Mr. Miller listened without interruption, his silence a respectful space that allowed me to unpack my pain. When I finished, my voice trailing off into a whisper, he didn't offer condolences. He offered clarity. Mrs. Richards, he began, his tone even and reassuring. Let me be perfectly clear. You have absolutely no legal or moral obligation to finance the lives of your adult children. The money in your accounts is yours, and yours alone. Your decision to cease payments is not erratic or unstable. It is a rational and legally sound response to a deeply unfortunate situation. Every word he spoke was like a reinforcing beam being hammered into the crumbling foundation of my self-worth. He validated my anger, legitimized my decision, and stripped away the layers of guilt that had been clinging to me. We spoke for nearly an hour. He advised me on the immediate steps I should take, laying out a clear, methodical plan that felt like a lifeline. He warned me, as Diana had, that David and Sophie would likely not give up easily. He spoke of terms like undue influence and elder financial abuse, and hearing my painful experience categorized in such stark legal language was both shocking and incredibly empowering. I wasn't just a heartbroken mother. I was a person whose rights had been violated, and there were laws designed to protect me. I hung up the phone, feeling as though I had just been handed a shield and a sword after a lifetime of fighting battles with my bare hands. My first stop that afternoon was the bank. The branch was the same one I'd been going to for 30 years, and the teller, a kind young woman named Sarah, greeted me with her usual warm smile. The usual, Mrs. Richards, she asked, already reaching for a transfer slip. For years, the usual had been a withdrawal or a transfer to David's account. A hot flush of shame washed over me. How many people had silently witnessed my long, slow depletion? I shook my head, my voice firmer than I expected. No, Sarah, not today. I need to speak with the branch manager about making some significant changes to my accounts. The manager's office was a small, quiet room that smelled of clean carpets and bureaucracy. I sat across from him, my back straight, and laid out my instructions, reciting the points Mr. Miller had given me. I wanted to cancel all recurring automatic transfers, effective immediately. I wanted to place a verbal password on my account for all telephone inquiries. I wanted to remove David as a secondary contact and emergency beneficiary. With each directive I gave, I felt a weight lifting, a loosening of chains I hadn't even fully realized were there. The manager was discreet and efficient, his pen scratching across forms that would systematically dismantle the financial infrastructure of my old life. The final step was the most symbolic. I closed the small savings account I had opened for David when he was a boy, the one I had foolishly allowed him to use. The account balance was only a few $100s, but as I signed the paper to transfer the funds back into my own account, it felt like I was reclaiming the very last piece of myself I had given away. I walked out of that bank and into the bright Colorado sunshine feeling strangely light, as if I had just shed a heavy, invisible coat. For the first time in years, my financial future was entirely my own. The next day, I continued to build my fortress. My destination was a local hardware store, a place I usually visited to buy things for David and Sophie's apartment, a new shower head, spackle for a hole in the wall, a stronger pesticide for the ants in their kitchen. Today, my mission was a different one, my own security. I spent nearly an hour in the aisle with the locks, examining the different models of deadbolts. I chose the heaviest, most formidable ones, the kind that promised absolute security. I also arranged for a local company to come and install a security system, with cameras covering the front and back doors. The young man who came to install everything the following afternoon was polite and professional. I watched as he expertly removed the old locks, the ones David and Sophie had keys to. The sound of his drill was a jarring but necessary noise, the sound of the old world being forcibly unmade. He handed me the new set of keys, heavy and solid in my palm. They felt different, not just physically, but symbolically. They were keys to my home, and mine alone. When he was finished, he showed me how to use the security system. I watched on a small monitor as the world outside my front door was rendered in stark, emotionless black and white. There was my porch, my rose bushes, the quiet, empty street. It was a strange, disembodying feeling to see my own home as a potential crime scene, to need technology to feel safe for my own child. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. But as the technician left and I turned the new deadbolt for the first time, the solid, definitive thunk of the lock sliding into place was one of the most satisfying sounds I had ever heard. It was the sound of a boundary being set, a door being closed not just against them, but against the person I used to be. It was as I was testing the new camera system, awkwardly zooming in on one of my wilting petunias, that my new life began in a way I never could have anticipated. A woman I didn't recognize was walking her dog on the sidewalk across the street. She was around my age, with a kind face and a short, stylish crop of silver hair. She saw me looking at the newly installed camera above my door and gave a friendly, curious wave, on impulse, a gesture that felt foreign after so many days of self-imposed isolation. I waved back. She gently tugged her beagle's leash and crossed the street, her smile warm and genuine. "New security?" she asked, her voice pleasant. "I'm Evelyn. I just moved into the blue house down the corner a couple of months ago." I introduced myself, feeling a bit rusty at the simple act of meeting someone new. "Yes," I said, gesturing vaguely at the camera, "just taking some precautions." My explanation felt thin, and I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. She didn't press, but simply nodded. "Well, you can never be too careful. It's a quiet neighborhood, but peace of mind is priceless. isn't it? Her choice of words, peace of mind, struck a deep chord within me. It was exactly what I was so desperately trying to build. We stood there for a moment in comfortable silence, her beagle sniffing contentedly at my azaleas. Then, in another uncharacteristically bold move, I heard myself say, "I just put on a pot of tea. Would you like to come in for a cup?" Evelyn's face lit up. "I'd love that," she said, as I prepared the tea in my kitchen. A sense of nervous energy buzzed through me. I was inviting a stranger into my newly fortified home, into the epicenter of my grief. But there was something about her calm, non-judgmental demeanor that made me feel safe. We sat in my living room, and as we sipped our tea, she began to tell me about her move to Denver to be closer to her grandchildren. And then she asked about my family. The question was innocent, but it landed with the weight of a boulder. I hesitated, the carefully constructed walls I had just built threatening to crumble. I could have given her the polite, superficial answer, but looking into her kind eyes, I decided to take a risk. I told her the truth. The story was less of a raw, emotional outpouring and more of a quiet, factual recounting of events. The pain was still there, a constant, dull ache beneath the surface, but a thin layer of protective scar tissue had begun to form. I told her about the wedding, the phone call, the years of financial support, and my decision to finally cut the cord. I expected her to be shocked, to offer words of pity or outrage. Instead, she just listened, her gaze unwavering, nodding occasionally. When I finished, a heavy silence filled the room. She placed her teacup down and looked at me, her eyes glistening with an empathy that was so profound, it felt like a physical embrace. "My daughter," she said, her voice soft but steady. "It was 5 years ago. It wasn't a secret wedding, but it was everything else. The constant financial emergencies, the emotional blackmail, the way my presence was only welcome when my wallet was open." My jaw dropped. The parallels were stunning, a chilling echo of my own experience. She told me about her own painful decision to set boundaries, the guilt, the angry accusations, and the lonely, difficult months that followed. "I thought I would lose her forever," Evelyn confessed. "And for a while, I did lose her. But forcing her to stand on her own 2 feet was the only way she could ever learn to walk. Our relationship today is real. It's based on love, not dependency." Tears streamed down my face, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity. They were not tears of grief or anger. They were tears of relief. I was not alone. My story, which had felt like a uniquely shameful and isolating tragedy, was a story she already knew. We talked for 2 more hours. Two women who had been strangers that morning, now bound by the shared pain of loving a child who had taken too much. When she left, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in years. The fortress I had built no longer felt like a prison to keep me safe from the world. It had felt like a home again, a space where I could begin to heal. The next day, Evelyn invited me for a walk in the park. As we walked, we talked about books, gardening, and our lives before we were mothers. It was a conversation where I was not a provider, not a victim, not a bank account, but simply Lisa. And as the sun set over the mountains, I felt the first, tentative seeds of a new life beginning to sprout in the barren soil of my old one. The weeks that followed my meeting with Evelyn were like a slow, deep breath after years of being submerged. The peace was a fragile, beautiful thing, and I guarded it fiercely. A new rhythm began to establish itself, one not dictated by the manufactured crises of my son and his wife, but by my own quiet desires. Evelyn and I fell into a comfortable friendship, marked by daily walks, afternoons spent in our gardens, and evenings sharing stories over tea. For the first time in a decade, I had a real friend. The tight knot of anxiety in my chest, a knot I hadn't even realized was there, began to slowly unwind. I had followed Miller's advice, documenting everything. But as the days turned into a peaceful month, a part of me hoped my defiance had been enough. The silence from their end felt like a truce, a space in which I could rebuild. I started painting again, a passion I had abandoned when Arthur passed away. I set up an easel by the large window in my spare room, the scent of turpentine and oil paints mingling with the scent of the roses from my garden. I was painting a landscape of the mountains at sunset, the canvas slowly filling with strokes of lavender and gold, when the chime from my new security system sounded through the house. It was a soft sound, but it landed in the quiet room with the force of a gunshot. My heart leaped into my throat. I put down my paintbrush, my hand suddenly slick with sweat, and went to the monitor in the hallway. There, on the screen, my fragile piece shattered. 3 figures stood on my front porch, a silent, unwelcome trinity rendered in the stark gray scale of the security camera. David, Sophie, and a man I had never seen before. A man in a tailored suit holding a leather briefcase. My first instinct was to hide, but the sight of them standing there, so full of purpose on the very doorstep they'd been excluded from, ignited my newfound anger. I had built these walls for a reason. I watched them on the monitor. Sophie rang the doorbell again, her movements sharp and impatient. David stood slightly behind her, hands shoved deep in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the welcome mat. The man in the suit, however, looked directly into the lens, his expression a practiced mask of calm concern. He was the professional they had brought to do their dirty work. I pressed the button on the intercom, my voice emerging steadier than I felt. "Can I help you?" The sound of my own disembodied voice made them all jump. Sophie glared at the speaker box. "Lisa, open the door. We need to talk." Her tone was a command, not a request. I kept my own voice level. "I have nothing to say to you." "Sophie!" It was the suited man who stepped forward then, placing a placating hand on Sophie's arm. "Mrs. Richards," he began, his voice oleaginous and smooth. "My name is Mr. Davenport. I'm an attorney. Your son and his wife are here with me because they are deeply concerned about you." Concerned. The word was a grotesque perversion of the truth. "Their concern is touching," I said through the intercom, my words dripping with irony. "But as you can see, I am perfectly fine." "Mister?" Davenport's smile never wavered. "We understand that you may feel that way, but your recent actions cutting off contact, making abrupt financial changes have been cause for alarm. David and Sophie are worried that you may be under some undue influence, or that you might be feeling confused. They just want to ensure that you and your assets are properly protected." There it was. The word at the heart of it all: assets, my home, my savings. That was what needed protecting, but not in the way he was implying. "I have my own legal counsel, Mr. Davenport," I said. The name, Mr. Miller, a talisman of strength. Any further communication can go through him. Sophie finally lost her composure, shoving the lawyer aside. "This is ridiculous," she hissed at the intercom. "We are your family. You can't just shut us out." I looked at my son's image on the screen. He finally glanced up, his face a miserable portrait of shame and conflict. Our eyes met through the unblinking lens of the camera. I saw the little boy I had raised trapped inside the body of a man trying to store my home to take what he believed was his. It broke my heart, but my resolve did not crack. "You shut me out first, Sophie," I said quietly. "Now, please leave my property, or I will be calling the police." The threat hung in the air. I saw Davenport whisper something to Sophie, and with one last look of pure venom at the camera, she marched back to their car. David lingered for a second, his expression unreadable, before he turned and followed. I watched them drive away, my command center in the hallway feeling both like a sanctuary and a prison. The walls had held, but I knew this was not the end. The piece that followed was a tense, watchful quiet. I lived with a low-grade hum of anxiety, my eyes constantly flicking to the security monitor. My conversations with Evelyn were a lifeline, a daily reminder of the sane world that still existed. It was she who encouraged me to continue with my painting, to not let them take that from me as well. I tried, but the joy of creation was tainted by the looming threat of what they might do next. Mr. Miller had warned me their next move would be an attempt to officially discredit me, and his prediction proved chillingly accurate. The first sign came from my local pharmacy. Mr. Gable, the pharmacist who had known me for years, was unusually quiet and avoided my eyes. A week later, Mr. Miller informed me why. His team had discovered that Sophie had visited Mr. Gable. Armed with a fabricated story of my forgetfulness, she had coaxed him into signing a statement confirming my prescription habits were irregular. A deeply misleading statement. Given that my only purchases were over-the-counter vitamins, she had twisted my good health into a weapon against me. The second attack came from my neighbor across the street, a grumpy man named Mr. Henderson. He had provided a statement about my erratic behavior, citing the installation of security cameras and the frequent presence of an unknown woman, who was, of course, Evelyn. Sophie had expertly exploited his petty grievances, transforming my attempts to feel safe and my new friendship into evidence of paranoia. The final blow came on a Thursday afternoon. A knock on the door. Polite but firm. I checked the monitor and saw a woman in a conservative suit holding a clipboard. My blood ran cold. I knew who she was. I opened the door. The security chain still latched. She held up an official ID. "My name is Carol Brady. I'm a social worker with Adult Protective Services," she said. "We've received a report from concerned parties expressing worry for your well-being. May I come in?" This was it. They had brought the government to my doorstep. For a second, I felt the urge to slam the door, but Mr. Miller's voice of calm preparation echoed in my head. I unlatched the chain. "Of course," I said steadily. "Please come in, but before we speak, I would like to call my attorney to join us." The social worker, Miss Brady, raised an eyebrow but nodded. I led her to the living room and immediately called Mr. Miller, who promised to be there in 20 minutes. The silence in the room was thick. I sat in my armchair, the one facing Arthur's portrait, and waited. When Mr. Miller arrived, the atmosphere shifted. He was the picture of calm authority. After introductions, Miss Brady began, explaining that the report cited my sudden social isolation, financial recklessness, and signs of paranoia. Before I could process the sting of those accusations, Mr. Miller opened his briefcase. "Miss Brady," he said calmly, "my client is not isolated. She is protecting herself. She is not reckless. She is prudent. And she is not paranoid. She is responding to a very real threat." He then proceeded to lay out the entire story with the irrefutable logic of facts. He placed a stack of bank statements on the coffee table, highlighted to show the 4-year one-way flow of cash from my account to theirs. He showed her the timeline of events and the security recording of the confrontation on my porch. He presented the counter statement from a now horrified Mr. Gable, explaining how his words had been twisted. I watched Miss Brady's face as she took it all in. Her professional neutrality slowly softened, replaced by a dawning comprehension, and then a deep, weary sympathy. She looked from the spreadsheets of financial data to the cold, calculating voice of the lawyer on the video, and then to me. I was not the confused, paranoid woman described in her report. "Mrs. Richards," she said after a long silence, her tone now gentle. "Thank you for being so transparent." She turned to Mr. Miller. "Based on the evidence you presented, it's clear the report filed against your client was made in bad faith." She gathered her papers, her movements efficient. "I see no evidence that Mrs. Richards is at risk or unable to care for herself. I will be closing this case, effective immediately." The closing of her folder was the end of the visit, and a closing of a door on their power to use the system against me. As I showed her out, I felt not triumph, but a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. I had won another battle, but the war, I knew, was about to escalate to a new and even more terrifying level. The visit from Adult Protective Services was a decisive victory, but the silence it purchased was unnerving. It was the quiet before a storm, the eerie calm that precedes a truly devastating earthquake. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that David and Sophie had not given up. They had merely been forced to retreat and regroup. Their failed attempt to use the system as a blunt instrument had exposed their desperation. and a desperate person is a dangerous one. I spent the next 2 weeks in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the other shoe to drop. My painting easel stood untouched, the vibrant sunset half finished, a monument to a piece that now felt like a distant memory. Every rustle of leaves outside my window, every creak of the floorboard sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. The fortress I had built now truly felt like a cage, one of my own making. The official declaration of war arrived on a rainy Monday afternoon, delivered not by a soldier, but by a courier in a waterproof jacket. He handed me a thick manila envelope, his expression impassive. My hands were surprisingly steady as I signed for it. I closed the door, the satisfying thunk of the deadbolt doing little to soothe the frantic pounding of my heart. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had once planned birthday parties and holiday meals, and slid my finger under the seal. The documents inside were dense with the cold, impersonal language of the law, but the words leaped off the page. Sharp and cruel as shards of glass, petition for an emergency hearing to determine capacity and appoint a legal guardian. It was real. They had actually done it. My son, the boy I had rocked to sleep and nursed through fevers, had signed a legal document petitioning a court to declare his own mother mentally incompetent. The petition was a work of fiction, a grotesque caricature of the past few months, painting me as a volatile, paranoid recluse who was a danger to herself and her own finances. It cited the statements from the pharmacist and the neighbor as proof of my deteriorating mental state. It twisted my refusal to speak with their lawyer into evidence of my inability to reason. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, clearly crafted by the slick, predatory attorney from my front porch, Mr. Davenport. Reading it, I felt a strange and chilling detachment, as if I were reading a story about someone else, a sad, confused old woman I didn't know. But my name was on every page, a constant, brutal reminder that this was my life they were attempting to dismantle. For a moment, a wave of pure, paralyzing terror washed over me. This was a battle on a new front, a formal public stage where their lies would be given the same weight as my truth. The thought of standing in a courtroom, of having my life, my mind, my very essence picked apart and judged by strangers, was nauseating. Could I do this? Did I have the strength? The image of Arthur's smiling face on the mantelpiece flashed in my mind, his imagined voice a steady anchor. Be your heart's fiercest protector. I stood up, the legal documents clutched in my hand, and walked to the phone. I did not call Mr. Miller first. I called Diana. Her reaction was, as always, a cleansing fire. When I told her about the lawsuit, she was silent for a long moment before letting out a string of curses that would have made a sailor blush. "He is no longer my nephew," she said, her voice flat and cold with a fury that mirrored my own. "He is a stranger who happens to share some of your DNA, and you will fight him. Lisa, we will fight him." Her use of the word "we" was a balm to my terrified soul. An hour later, Evelyn was at my door, a plate of still warm cookies in her hand, her expression one of grim determination. Diana had called her immediately after hanging up with me. The three of us sat at my kitchen table, the legal papers spread out between us like a battle map. Evelyn placed her hand over mine, her touch warm and firm. "You are not alone in this," she said. "We will be your witnesses. We will be your army." That afternoon, with my two staunchest allies by my side, I met with Mr. Miller. He reviewed the petition, his expression a mask of professional calm. But I could see the steel in his eyes. "This is a desperate, aggressive move," he said, "and it will be their undoing. The burden of proof is on them. Lisa, they have to prove to a judge that you are incapable of managing your own affairs. Our job is to prove what we already know to be true, that you are not only competent, but that you are the victim of a calculated and malicious campaign of financial exploitation." In the days leading up to the hearing, my house became a war room. Mr. Miller meticulously prepared me, walking me through the process, anticipating the questions their lawyer would ask, and helping me gather every piece of evidence we had. We compiled years of financial records, every check, every transfer, every emergency I had funded. We had the sworn affidavit from the pharmacist, recanting his statement and detailing how Sophie had manipulated him. We had the security footage, and we had my army. Diana flew in from Seattle the day before the hearing, her presence a force of nature in my quiet home. And Evelyn was a constant, calming presence. The morning of the hearing, I woke before dawn. I chose my outfit with the care of a general, selecting her armor a simple, elegant navy blue suit. It was the suit I had worn to Arthur's funeral, a garment imbued with the memory of loss, but also of enduring strength. As I looked at my reflection in the mirror, I saw not a victim, but a survivor. The fear was still there, a cold knot in the pit of my stomach, but it was overshadowed by an iron resolve. They had come for my money, for my home, for my freedom, but in their greed, they had made a fatal miscalculation. They had come for my dignity, and that was a part of me I would not surrender without a fight. The courtroom was a cold, intimidating space of dark wood and high ceilings. David and Sophie were already there, sitting beside their lawyer, Mr. Davenport. Sophie was dressed in somber black, a calculated performance of a grieving daughter. She met my gaze with a look of pure, unadulterated animosity. David, however, looked ill. His face was pale and drawn, and he stared resolutely at the polished floor, unable to look at me. He was a ghost at the funeral of his own conscience. Mr. Davenport began his opening statement, his voice resonating through the silent room. He painted a masterful, tragic portrait of a beloved mother, lost to the fog of age and paranoia, a vulnerable woman being preyed upon by new influences. A clear reference to Evelyn, every word was a lie, polished to a high shine. Their case began to unravel almost as soon as their witnesses took the stand. Mr. Henderson, my grumpy neighbor, grumbled his way through his testimony about my strange behavior. But under Mr. Miller's calm, precise cross-examination, he was forced to admit that he had never spoken a single word to me during that time, and that his entire assessment was based on watching me from across the street. Next came the pharmacist, Mr. Gable, who looked deeply ashamed, on the stand. He told the truth, explaining to the judge how Sophie had misled him into signing a document he didn't fully understand, preying on his genuine concern for an old customer. His testimony dismantled a key pillar of their fabricated evidence. Then Sophie took the stand. Her performance was Oscar-worthy. She wept as she described my sudden, hostile transformation, her voice trembling as she spoke of her love for me, the second mother she was so terrified of losing. It was a beautiful, compelling lie, but on cross-examination, Mr. Miller began to pick it apart, thread by thread. Mrs. Richards, he asked, his tone gentle. Can you tell the court the last time you initiated a call to my client simply to ask how she was? Sophie stammered, unable to provide a single date. He then asked her about the wedding. You told my client you only invited special people, correct? Sophie's face flushed. That was a misunderstanding, she mumbled. Please, Mr. Miller pressed. Explain to the court the context in which telling the woman who paid your rent for 4 years that she is not special could be a misunderstanding. There was no answer. David was the last to testify. Seeing my son on the witness stand, swearing an oath to tell the truth before a judge, knowing he was about to lie about my sanity, was a singular, soul-crushing agony. He recited the lines he had clearly been coached to say, his voice monotone, his eyes fixed on a point on the far wall. He spoke of my irrationality, my confusion, but his heart wasn't in it. When Mr. Miller cross-examined him, he crumbled. Mr. Richards, Miller asked, is it true that in the last 4 years, your mother has given you and your wife financial support totaling over $35,000? David flinched. She was generous. Is it also true, Miller continued, that you and your wife entered my client's home without permission, and that you brought an attorney to pressure her into signing over power of attorney? David could only whisper, We were worried. His testimony was not that of a concerned son, but of a cornered, shamefaced boy. Then it was our turn. Mr. Miller presented the mountain of financial evidence, the numbers telling a clear, undeniable story of systematic exploitation. Etheth Evelyn testified with quiet, dignified grace about our friendship, painting a picture of me as lucid, engaged, and full of life. Diana testified with the ferocity of a lioness, her anger at the injustice done to her sister palpable in the courtroom. And finally, it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand, every eye in the room on me. I sat down, looked directly at the judge, a woman with intelligent, discerning eyes, and I told my story. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I simply stated the facts, from the secret wedding to the petition clutched in my hands. Mr. Miller asked his final question. Mrs. Richards, why did you stop supporting your son? I took a breath, and for the first time, I looked at David. Because I finally realized, I said, my voice clear and strong, that our relationship had become a transaction, and I was no longer willing to pay for a love that was not real. After my last words were spoken, a profound silence descended upon the courtroom. It was not an empty silence, but a living thing, thick with the weight of years of unspoken truths now laid bare. I walked back to my seat beside Mr. Miller, my legs feeling strangely distant, as if they belonged to someone else. I did not look at David or Sophie. My testimony was not for them. It was for myself. And for the record, Mr. Davenport's closing argument was a pale, flimsy thing, a desperate attempt to stitch together the tattered remnants of his fabricated narrative. But the truth, once spoken, has its own power. It cannot be easily unsaid. Mr. Miller's final statement was brief, powerful, and precise. He did not appeal to emotion. He simply pointed to the mountain of evidence and let the facts speak for themselves. Your Honor, he concluded, this is not a case about a mother's confusion. It is a case about a son's greed and a daughter-in-law's manipulation. We ask that you see it for what it is. The judge, a woman whose discerning eyes had missed nothing throughout the proceedings, announced a 2-hour recess for her deliberation. The wait was the longest 2 hours of my life. We sat in a small private conference room, Mr. Miller, Diana, Evelyn, and I. No one spoke much. Diana held my hand, her grip firm and steady, a silent transfer of her own unwavering strength. Evelyn kept refilling my water glass, her quiet acts of care a soothing balm on my frayed nerves. I felt a strange sense of calm. I had done everything I could. I had walked through the fire, and whatever happened next, I knew I would not be consumed by it. I had spoken my truth, and that, in itself, was a victory. When we were called back into the courtroom, the air was electric with tension. David and Sophie were already in their seats. Sophie stared straight ahead, her jaw tight, a statue of furious denial. David did not look up. He seemed to have shrunk, a man collapsing under the weight of his own profound shame. The judge entered, and we all rose. She sat, cleared her throat, and looked directly at me. Her words were not just a ruling. They were a meticulous and damning reconstruction of my reality. After a thorough review of all evidence and testimony presented, she began, her voice clear and authoritative. It is the finding of this court that Mrs. Lisa Richards is in full and exceptional command of her mental and financial faculties. The psychiatric evaluations confirm her cognitive competence, and her recent financial decisions, while understandably causing distress to the petitioners, are deemed entirely rational, prudent, and well within her legal rights. A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. Tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed welled in my eyes. Diana squeezed my hand so tightly I thought the bones might crack, but the judge was not finished. She turned her gaze, cold and sharp, upon David and Sophie. Furthermore, she continued, her tone laced with a stern disapproval that echoed through the silent room. The evidence strongly suggests that this petition was not filed out of genuine concern for Mrs. Richards's well-being. It appears to be a retaliatory action motivated by financial interest, brought in bad faith after the petitioner's primary source of income was rightfully terminated. This court finds the petitioner's actions to be a clear and disturbing case of attempted elder financial exploitation. The words hung in the air, a public and official condemnation of everything they had done. The judge completely and unequivocally denied their petition for guardianship. Justice. It was a word I had only understood in the abstract, but in that moment, I felt its profound, healing weight as the judge concluded the session. Sophie shot a look of pure hatred at me, a look that promised this was not over for her. But I knew it was. She had no power over me anymore. Mister. Davenport quickly packed his briefcase, avoiding eye contact with everyone, as they rose to leave. David finally looked at me. His face was a ravaged landscape of guilt and despair. There were tears streaming down his cheeks. For a fleeting second, I saw the little boy I loved, but he was gone, replaced by this broken man who had tried to legally erase me. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Then, he turned and followed Sophie out of the courtroom. I was immediately enveloped in the arms of Diana and Evelyn, their tears of relief mingling with my own. Mister. Miller shook my hand, his professional demeanor finally breaking into a warm, genuine smile. You were magnificent, Lisa, he said. We left the courthouse and stepped out into the bright, clean afternoon air. It felt like walking out of a long, dark tunnel. As we stood on the steps, waiting for a taxi, my phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out. It was a text message from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew instantly who it was from. The message was short, just 7 words. I'm sorry things got so out of hand. I stood there, staring at the screen, as Diana and Evelyn talked animatedly beside me. I read the words again and again, analyzing them with the cold clarity I had earned through this ordeal. I'm sorry, not I'm sorry for what I did, or I'm sorry for the pain I caused you. Just a vague, impersonal expression of regret. Things got out of hand, the classic language of a person refusing to take responsibility. Things didn't get out of hand. He and his wife had driven them there, deliberately, with malice and greed. This wasn't an apology. It was a coward's lament. A text message sent from the ruins of a relationship he had personally set on fire, complaining about the heat. It was a message about his own discomfort, not my pain. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that there was nothing left to salvage. There was no going back. With a calmness that felt like the deepest part of my soul finally settling, my thumb moved across the screen. I deleted the message. Then, I blocked the number. It was not an act of anger. It was an act of sanitation, of cleaning the final, toxic remnant of my old life from my new one. It was the last chain breaking, the final thread being cut. It was my true and final goodbye. The 3 months that followed the trial were a period of quiet, deliberate transformation. My house, my fortress, had done its job. It had kept me safe during the war. But fortresses are designed for war, and I was determined to live in peace. The house was filled with too many ghosts, both of the happy life with Arthur and the painful years that followed. To truly be free, I knew I had to leave the battlefield behind. With Evelyn's help, I put the house on the market. It sold quickly. The process of sorting through 40 years of memories was both painful and cathartic. I kept the things that brought me joy: Arthur's books, my painting supplies, photographs of a happier time, and let the rest go. Before I made any plans for my future, there was one last thing I had to do. I took a significant portion of the proceeds from the sale of the house and made a large anonymous donation to a national charity that provides legal aid to victims of elder financial abuse. It was not about charity. It was an act of solidarity. It was my way of taking the ugliest experience of my life and transforming it into a shield for someone else. Another mother, another father, who might be standing on the precipice I had just managed to step back from. That act felt like the true closing of the chapter. With my affairs in Denver settled, I packed my car and drove north, towards the sea and the mountains. towards my sister. I found a beautiful, light-filled apartment in Seattle, just a few blocks from Diana's home. The air smelled of salt and rain, a clean, fresh scent that felt like the beginning of everything. We fell into a new rhythm, one of sisterhood and shared history. We had coffee every morning, took long walks along the Puget Sound, and rediscovered the easy, unconditional love that had been overshadowed for so long by my singular focus on my son. I enrolled in an advanced art class at a local college, surrounded by people of all ages who were there for the pure love of creation. My half-finished painting of the Denver sunset was left behind, a relic of an interrupted life. Now, my canvases were filled with new landscapes, the dramatic gray skies over the water, the vibrant green of the Pacific Northwest forests, the bustling energy of the city. I traveled, taking a trip to Europe that I had put off for years. I stood before masterpieces in the Louvre, ate pasta in a tiny Roman trattoria, and watched the world go by from a cafe in Vienna. I did it all for myself, with a joy that was pure and unburdened. This evening, I am standing on my balcony, a cup of tea warming my hands, looking out at the city lights twinkling below. My new life is quiet, but it is not lonely. It is filled with the love of my sister, the companionship of new friends, and the deep, satisfying peace of my own company. On an easel just inside the glass door, a new painting is nearly complete. It's a portrait of Evelyn, her face lit with the same wise, kind smile she gave me on the day we first met. It is the best work I have ever done. I think of the woman I was a year ago, the one who measured her worth by how much she was needed, the one who believed love was a debt she had to keep paying. She seems like a stranger to me now. The woman I was had to be broken, so the woman I am could be born. And as I look out at the endless, hopeful horizon, I finally understand that the most important person you must love and protect is yourself. Freedom is not a gift. It is a future you must be willing to build with your own two hands.